questioning the thoughts from which your moral code derives. You think that suffering is part of some great plan that's been devised. I wonder, what will it take for you to start opening your eyes? I wonder.
Hello and welcome to the Atheist Experience. I'm your host, Russell Glasser, and with me today is Tracie Harris.
Howdy.
Today is Sunday, August 7th, 2016. We're a live call-in, internet-based atheist TV show broadcasting from Austin, Texas, dedicated to promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. You can catch us live on YouTube every Sunday or on ustream.tv. The official Atheist Experience website is www.atheist-experience.com. You can also provide feedback by commenting on the official show blog at freethoughtblogs.com/AXP, or you can email us at tv@atheist-community.org. Or you can join the Atheist Experience official discussion group on Facebook. If you enjoy this show, please check out our related podcast, The Nonprofits, currently airing on the first and third Wednesdays of the month. You can find links at the Atheist Experience website. The next Nonprofits will be recorded on August 17th. And this show, as well as that one, people are welcome to come into the studio and sit in live on a screening or recording for the Nonprofits, which is audio only. So check out the website for details. As always, the cast and crew of the Atheist Experience will be going to dinner this evening after the show. But we are going to a different venue this week. We're trying out a place called Star of India. It is an Indian buffet, so I hope that everybody who intends to come has heard these announcements for the last couple of weeks. The address is 2900 West Anderson Lane. So go there, not the normal place this week, and we'll see how that goes. A couple of other events are coming up pretty soon. Let's see, I believe Beth Presswood is organizing a visit to Hippie Hollow for anybody who's interested in attending. It's going to take place on August 20th, and the Atheist Community of Austin Facebook page has more details. We will be hosting a booth, as usual, at the Austin Pride Festival on August 27th. So come on down and say hi and get some cool stuff, atheist-related stuff. And also the Bat Cruise is coming up real soon now. Tickets are available on the website, although because it's a new website, there may be some glitches in trying to check out. We won't take your money. Just try again if it doesn't work the first time.
September 24th, right
Yes.
there, right?
September 24th is the date of the Bat Cruise.
There you go.
That is the big event of the season, and I just want to promote that lots of people should come to that. We're going to be having a great time with blogger and author Greta Christina, who's going to be giving a lecture at
Trinity.
Yes.
Right?
Trinity.
On Speedway.
On Speedway. Always check the blog before an event. We swear we're going to have that on the Facebook page and the blog.
Yeah.
Greta Christina is going to be there. Our friend Rebecca Vitzman, who you may know as the person who told Wolf Blitzer that she's an atheist a few years ago. And possibly another special musical guest, but I'm not going to announce that for sure because we haven't squared it away. But for all you people who are always saying, hey, I'd like to come take a visit to Austin and check out the show sometime, that's the weekend you come.
Absolutely.
All right. How are you, Tracie?
Doing good. Feeling good. So I guess we have like a brief topic before we get into calls.
Sure, let's talk about it.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about Prejudice. I have encountered some misconceptions about prejudice, and I wanted to just sort of clarify the difference between prejudice and discrimination, and especially legal discrimination. So, legal discrimination would be to withhold something like job offers or housing opportunities from people that are in any of the protected classes that we're used to understanding legally here in the United States. So you have particular classes that are based on race or based on gender or based on religion even is protected.
Yeah, I actually looked this up earlier today, and there are a lot of specific things that, like, you can't fire somebody for being the wrong gender or race. You also can't fire them because they happen to get pregnant, for instance.
These would be examples of discrimination against something that is called a legally protected class.
Yes.
This is very different. You can discriminate against people in ways that don't necessarily hit a protected class, right? Like in your personal life, you could discriminate against a group of people. Like, for example, a person could discriminate against an atheist in a way that's not illegal by, saying I'm not friends with anybody that's an atheist, right? I mean, you're being discriminating. And you're doing it based on a particular demographic. And you could do that. You could say, I don't want to be friends with somebody that is, doesn't have a college degree. You could discriminate against people based on being some kind of an elitist about your education, right? I mean, there's all kinds of ways that you could. Now, these are not illegal forms of discrimination.
No, I mean, and it doesn't range all the way to things that define your career and the things you have the right to do. My wife noticed a couple of weeks ago when we were out to dinner, like, we had our phones out playing Pokemon Go, and a waiter stopped to talk to us and was like, enthusiastic about Pokemon Go. But he was also like carrying some drinks, which my wife noticed were headed towards some black people who were like the only people in there at the only other people. And he was just sitting there chatting away.
Okay.
And she was like, man, he's sure making those people wait a long time
drinks,
so we can talk about video games. And that's not on purpose. But it can be sort of an unconscious preference that happens sometimes.
But the point is, discrimination is when you behave differently toward a group or toward a person when you think that they're a member of a particular group, and you can discriminate against people in what you might consider a positive way. You might think that by treating particularly, let's say you think someone is very attractive, and so you treat them much better, right? That's discriminating in a way that would be positive, like you're giving them special positive treatment. And you could also say that if someone's not as attractive, you don't treat them as well, right? So you can look at it either way. But the point is that there's a legal sort of discrimination that tries to protect people and let them have the same opportunities that we should have available to us in order to live our lives. And then there's this other form of discrimination, which is personal, and preferential, and we exercise that ourselves in our own lives in many different ways. And sometimes we're being real jerks about it, and sometimes we have reasons for what we're doing. But discrimination may or may not be sometimes based on prejudices, right? So a prejudice would be something that it may not even manifest in a form of discrimination, right? Like you can hold a prejudice in your head that doesn't really show. And that prejudice happens when you have opinions about a particular individual because you know that they're associated with a group. And their association with that group really has nothing to do with your assumptions about the individual, right? So basically, if I say to Russell that my friend, Jim does not have a college degree, and Russell's like, really, did he tell you that? And I say, well, no, but he's a janitor. Right? That's a prejudice. That's me saying that Jim can't possibly have a degree, or else why would he be a janitor, right? I mean, but I don't know whether Jim has that degree or not. It's true that it might not be required to have a degree to be a janitor, but that doesn't equal that everyone who's a janitor does not have a college degree. Mm-hmm. And so there's positive prejudices that could be in my head as well. For example, I might think that everyone who's Asian is very good at math,
Yeah. I mean, in the very cerebral movie Harold and Kumar,
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I guess it was Harold was complaining about at the beginning was that his people assume that he's like going to be a doctor or something. One of them.
But that's the thing. It's like you can, prejudices are not always thinking bad things about someone. Sometimes it's that you think something good about them. Like if I think earlier before the show started, I told Russell, if you think that a nun is a good person, right? Like because they're so godly and religious and so they must be a nice person, a caring person, that's a prejudice, right? I mean, you think you're thinking something nice about them, but really what you're doing is stereotyping and objectifying them.
A lot of times, like, the good and bad things are actually just inverse ways of talking about the same thing. Like, I'm Jewish. A lot of people have a stereotype that Jews are cheap. Or, on the other side, a lot of people have the stereotype that Jews make really good money managers.
Yeah. Or that you're all doctors or lawyers.
Right. So, stuff like that.
Yeah, and so there's that. But, sometimes a person is affiliated with a group, and that does give you reasonable reason, I guess, justified reason for assuming things about them. So, for example, the Atheist Community of Austin, I'm a member of that, and somebody might say, well, she's an atheist. Well, there's a statement that you have to agree to when you join the Atheist Community of Austin, that you do not believe in any gods or God. And so if I'm a member of the Atheist Community of Austin, it is a reasonable assumption to say that because I have joined that group, that I am an atheist. Now, I could be lying, yes, but what I am portraying myself as is an atheist, and so it is fair for other people to take me at face value and say that Tracie presents as an atheist, and I'm accepting that that's what she is. And I know this because of her official affiliation with this group.
Right. And there are a lot of things that you could conclude demographically or statistically are probably true. Knowing that somebody's an atheist, you might say, like, you must be really interested in evolution, which is true about a lot of atheists that I know, but it's not necessarily true of the individual person that you're talking to.
Right, that's the thing. It's like you can't make the sweeping generalization about the individual based on the demographic that they are tied to, in like what he was just describing, that they're going to be interested in talking about evolution. They may not be. The only thing you can gain from the knowledge that they joined ACA is that they are espousing themselves to be an atheist and to not believe in a god or gods. That's all you can assume about the person's affiliation with the group. Other assumptions about it, no matter how many other atheists might believe in separation of church and state, this atheist may not, right? I mean, you cannot make those other broad assumptions about the person. You have to ask the person whether or not those particular assumptions that you have in your own head about this group because of prior experience or because of things that you might have read online or, whatever you've been exposed to cannot speak to the individual. It's just, those are prejudices that you hold in your head.
And I think it's something that we try really hard to be mindful of because we talk to so many different kinds of people on this show. So, like, there was a time when I was a lot younger and, I was sort of a belligerent atheist on the very new-ish internet when people would say, I'm religious, and I was like, what, really? You believe the earth was created 6,000 years ago? Or, well, you must be an idiot. And that is something that through experience with talking to a lot of people, if you make guesses or assumptions about what they're going to say, you're probably going to be wrong more often than you're right, because there are so many different categories that even people who adopt the same label fall into.
Yeah. But I guess my takeaway would simply be that if I had to leave you with just a couple ideas about prejudice is, number one, you can be prejudiced against a group of people or against an individual based on assumptions about a group that they have made a choice to join, right? So it doesn't matter if the person is born a certain way or if they have later in life chosen to affiliate with a certain group of people. If you're making generalizations about the individual based on their affiliation with the group, and that group is restricted to a certain set of information, and you're making inferences with other information that you've just sort of experienced that is not what the group is espousing, then you're being prejudiced, and you can be prejudiced against groups where people join them, or toward employment, or toward social clubs or anything. And you can also be prejudiced in ways that you may think are positive things to think about a person, right? You may have a positive opinion about the stereotypes that you're sticking this person with, but it's still a prejudice, and it's still not right to assign attributes or ideas to an individual because you hold these prejudices in your head. So just things to be aware of, I guess.
Yeah. And, it's better to acknowledge that everybody has prejudices rather than try to say, well, I don't have any prejudices. Yeah. I mean, that is more straightforward and honest.
Yeah.
Okay. So we are going to start today with Dustin in South Carolina. How are you, Dustin?
Hey, great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. I won't talk about Lindsay Lohan anymore. I'll make this a bit more interesting.
We had Dustin on testing the mics beforehand by reading random news stories. It was very enlightening.
Yes, okay. Perhaps a bit more enlightening is the topic of miracles. I'm sure you guys are well versed in it. I've been an atheist now for a couple of years. Went through a fairly traumatic and long drawn-out deconversion process starting in 2013, and here I am. I no longer have belief in any God, specifically the Christian God, but I find myself attracted to, oddly, Eastern mysticism ideas and these stories of miracles and healings, and just, I think it's human nature. I've heard you guys say multiple times, and I agree that humans like mystical things. We're attracted to it. So that's probably where that comes from. But I really am interested in miracles, the possibility of them, and if it's not a possibility, if they're all hoaxes or fabrications, why are there so many stories? How could there be so many millions of testimonies throughout thousands of years of being physically healed, and yet it all be fraudulent? How's that possible?
Let me ask you a question, Dustin. How could there be all of these claims about miracles and yet nothing ever documented in a way that's convincing?
No, I hear that. That's a fair question.
People are zealous. We're talking about religion here. These are zealots, and there are millions of them. Most of the people on the planet are religious, and most of the religions of the world espouse, the predominant religions anyway, have these ideas about miraculous happenings, right? They have these supernatural tales, and to me, it's not surprising that people who believe in it, most of what I hear of, like when people call the show and they're talking about a miracle, and we get into it, it's not even what you'd call a miracle. It's like somebody had, low odds of surviving cancer and they survived. Oh, it's a miracle.
Sure.
Is it?
Yeah. That's two things, really. One is, you have to be careful about how specific you get in defining miracles and what your threshold is, because a lot of people will just say that ordinary, boring things that do happen all the time are miracles. But the other thing is, when some really wild, unbelievable, improbable thing happens and people call it a miracle, there's also the question of how reliably are they reporting it?
Exactly.
Like people will exaggerate things in their mind. An example that I've heard, and this isn't even miraculous, but I've heard that many more people claim to have been at Woodstock than could possibly have been there, because it would have been 10 times as crowded. And those people aren't necessarily lying, they just absorbed some cultural messages and their brain sort of rearranged it internally until it really felt to the person like they were definitely there, but they're saying things that aren't true, not on purpose. Yeah, and that happens a lot with miraculous claims too.
Like the miracle of Fatima, right?
Yes,
you
love
have
that one.
all these different reports that, there's like different people saying different things occurred, and then a bunch of people that were there that say nothing happened, right? And then there's no documented evidence that this occurred, okay? So, I don't know if you're into miracles, then you probably are familiar with Fatima. But it's ridiculous. I mean, they're saying that the
That's the
sun,
one, yeah.
the sun was moving all over the sky, right?
Right. Yeah.
Now, if the
which
sun,
which would cause havoc all over the cosmos.
Yeah, and I mean, did any observatory report any? No. Did anybody feel any gravitational disturbances? No. I mean, did this happen? No. No, it didn't happen. And I had somebody calling up that was calling quite a lot. I finally addressed it on the blog, and his response was, "That's what makes it a miracle." Right?
Yeah,
because the sun could move everywhere and it didn't cause all this havoc, and the observatories didn't.
Sure.
It's like, well, what is the difference between a miracle and something that people are saying occurred that didn't occur?
Just unlikely, yeah. Can I jump in real quick?
Sure.
So I agree with both of you. Perhaps I made myself out initially to not sound like a skeptic. I'm very skeptical of miracle claims, and there hasn't been a single one that I couldn't poke holes in. But you may also agree with me that you can poke holes in just about anything if you try hard enough. And so I agree with you that most, perhaps all, but at least most miracle claims I've ever heard are very easy to debunk. They've got holes all throughout them. However, there are some that seem to be more reliable, and there's multiple attestations. Sometimes it's documented. Sometimes you catch it on video, and you can poke holes in that too. But at what point are we just poking holes in things because we don't accept the premise behind it?
I think there's something to what you say, by the way. I mean, I'm going to let you finish, but I mean, I think that there are some people who pride themselves in calling themselves skeptics, but what they're really doing is, doggedly, stubbornly refusing to accept anything, pretty much, even things for which there is overwhelming evidence. And so you have like creationists who like to frame themselves as evolution skeptics, for instance.
Right.
So, yeah, you can take that too far and be sort of hyper skeptical in a way that isn't really rational.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, you've probably heard this a million times. I'm sure it frustrates you like it does me. Christians will assert that all atheists are, they don't believe because of X. We want to sin, we're arrogant, fill in the blank. And to assert that hundreds of millions of non-believers can all be lumped into that category is absurd. In the same way, is it not absurd to explain away all miracle claims by saying they're all delusional, they just wanted to believe it, and so they just made it all up? I've
heard a lot of people say, and I've come to the conclusion on many times that it's just like, we will never know what happened in this particular case. There's reports. It seems like, somebody experienced something, but I don't know what it is. There's no way to investigate it, and so that's kind of the end of it. I mean, I don't know what else to do with it at that point. It's like, but I'm not going to say it is a miracle because I have not done anything to demonstrate it's a miracle. Right. I've simply said, I've heard these reports, I can't go back and investigate it, so I don't know what happened. But that's not a miracle. That's an inability to investigate the claim.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, and I feel like I'm going to want to talk about this more later in the show, but I'll just try to be brief. When I was on last with Jen Peoples, we got a caller who was, I think, a Muslim fella, and he was talking about some experiment that you could do with moonlight that proved that the moon emits light that is cold, which makes no sense scientifically. And so he said, A, this definitely happens when you use a thermometer, and B, it's unexplainable by science, so it proves that God exists, which is a very tenuous chain of logic to go down.
Sure.
But, I didn't outright dismiss that this was possible. I did say I don't necessarily believe that those experiments are accurate. I'd have to try it myself, and I'd like some of the audience to try it too. But there are a number of steps in the chain where it could be failing, and you don't want to just jump to the conclusion that experiment doesn't really happen the way you say it does, because it could turn out that that you're just making assumptions that aren't justified by evidence.
But I guess my question, though, is who has ever confirmed a miracle?
Yeah, do you have any examples of what you're talking about?
Like, how would you confirm that a miracle occurred? Because these things don't usually occur in a situation where you've got a lab setting and you're actually doing observations that could help you understand what's happening.
Right. That's a good question. No, I don't have any examples. And like I said, there are.
Well, I mean, you said some were very convincing, so you must have.
Well, there are no particular miracle claims that I can't explain away. However, there have been some that are more convincing than others. For instance, this isn't going to be compelling to you guys at all because you don't know him. One of my close friends who I trust and who has never lied to me that I know of has told me multiple stories of him being healed and healing others. I have no reason to think he would lie to me. Obviously, the personal attachment I have with him probably sways me more, but I have to think, and I pushed him with details, and I asked him detailed questions. He claimed that he had some serious joint damage in his knee, and it was healed instantaneously, and he was doing squats. I don't know how you just make something like that up, and you can be that delusional.
I mean, first of all, I wouldn't conclude that guy is lying, and I don't have all the details of the story either. Yeah. But I mean, one of the things is I already said that people aren't necessarily lying when they say they were at Woodstock. They just basically, I mean, people's minds are very, very malleable when it comes to processing information and filing it away in the long term. And sometimes, even if they're not like habitual liars or anything, they are saying things that seem true to them at the time, but turn out not to comport to the actual evidence. And another thing is that people have very low standards and very little medical understanding when it comes to self-reporting what kind of diseases they think they have. So a question I would ask, for instance, is, so you say you had such and such condition. Did a doctor check you out and say that, or is that just something you decided on your own?
Yeah, and the other issue, this reminds me, is we had a caller, a woman that was very adamant that God had healed her breast cancer. And during the conversation, I mean, she was just, God healed me, I had breast cancer, I don't have cancer anymore. And during the conversation, she said something about she was so glad that God healed her because she hates doctors and she didn't want to have to go to a doctor. And I said, so are you saying you hadn't been to a doctor for your cancer?
Self-diagnosed.
Yeah, it was. She said, I had a lump in my breast. What else would it be?
Yeah, bug bite?
I'm like, a cyst.
It could be a lot of things.
Some fatty tissue that got reabsorbed. I mean, and so that was her conclusion, was I had a lump in my breast and I prayed, and then, in a while the lump went away. And so I had breast cancer and God cured it. I don't think she was kidding. I think she believed it, but she's completely being unreasonable about it.
Is it possible that miracles, we'll use that term for lack of a better one, miracles can heal people and there still not be a God? In other words, is it possible that there's not a supernatural realm and yet there's some sort of energy that people can transfer to one another via whatever?
But here's the problem with that, right? I have a friend that one time described to me and said, what is a miracle? Like, what is a miracle? What constitutes a miracle? And he said, a miracle is something that happens that can't, right? It's something that happens that can't happen.
Which is nonsense.
Well, but that's what we're saying a miracle must be, because if it can happen, then it's not a miracle, because this is something that's possible. So it has to be something that happens that's not possible for it to be a miracle.
Not possible by certain mechanics. I mean, I think you'd have to have a stipulation on that, wouldn't you?
I don't know. If it's possible, is it
not possible by natural means, not possible by the laws of nature? I mean, you'd have to.
What does that mean?
Some other words there, but
I mean, what does it mean?
Not possible by any way that we could explain.
But you're sitting here explaining it, though. You're saying, could there be this energy? Well, if there is, then it's possible, and there's energy, and we're talking about a physical mechanism, and here we are now back into the non-miracle.
Yeah, and there are a lot of things that we can't explain. That's not the same thing as saying we have no explanation. I mean, there were a lot of things that were undiscovered for a really long time, things that we understand now, but wouldn't have understood like 100 or 200 years ago. And although it seems like there's been a lot of scientific progress, and there are still a lot of things that we haven't worked out the explanation for yet, because science isn't omniscient. So
No, I hear you.
just
That's good.
saying,
That's good.
I mean, just saying that something is without an explanation is not the same thing as demonstrating that it's miraculous.
Correct.
I agree with you 100%. So I guess what I'm asking is, I'm not trying to explain it, but I'm asking, is it possible that these people who claimed to have illnesses healed by some inexplicable means, that they're sincere and that it actually happened?
How would you know the difference between that and, for example, a spontaneous remission, which is known to occur?
Is it possible that a blind person who claims that they received their sight, is it possible that that happened and we don't have an explanation for it? But just because we don't have an explanation for it, is it fair to just write off the entire event?
Who's writing off an event, though?
Well, we are. We atheists
Are we?
say that there's no way.
No, I mean, I think what we're saying is not, I mean, what I try not to say,
The person who
no, that
says-
thing couldn't have possibly happened.
The person who says it's a miracle is making a specific claim.
Right.
No, I agree. I hear you.
When a person, if
But-
somebody was blind and then they became sighted by a mechanism we could not explain at this time, and someone says that's a miracle, my question is, how did you confirm that? How do you know that? I'm not making a claim about it. I'm not saying that this, if you show me that it happened, I'm not going to sit here and say it didn't. Right? If you can demonstrate to me that this occurred and that this is occurring, that maybe they have like a dozen people that they had spontaneously became sighted, right? It's like, and this is documented, the AMA is all over it, and I'm looking at it and it happened. I'm willing to acknowledge that it happened, but when someone says it's a miracle, I'm sitting here saying, how did you confirm that?
That's fair, but are we not, in a way, writing it off when we try to explain it away by saying things like delusion, wishful thinking? That is essentially writing it off and explaining it away, is it not?
If the person isn't able to demonstrate that it actually occurred, I think it's fair to say that there could be something else going on, and the little bit of mental instability might not be out of the question.
I think what I would say is that, philosophically, you could get really technical and say nothing is out of the question. We could be, all the things that we think about everything could be completely screwed up because, let's say, we're a brain in a vat in the Matrix or whatever. Whatever stoner college philosophy majors come up with. The process that we go through to understand the world involves building up a model, and when, sort of a mental model, and when things crash into that model that don't mesh with it, it's fair to say that you can not just immediately incorporate that new information, but to ask for further details and do a lot more investigation before you try to do something that will completely flip your model in some way. So if somebody said, to take one of the cliche examples that we have from time to time, like gravity doesn't exist, but there are billions of tiny invisible gremlins all the time who really like things to be on the ground, and so they consciously run up and, I drop an object and they grab the object and pull it downward so that it hits the ground, and it's not gravity, which is a force that two things exert on each other, it's gremlins.
Right. Sure.
I'm not saying we should rule that out, but I am saying that somebody who's making that very specific claim has a lot of hurdles to cross before he can make that realistic and acceptable.
It is an extraordinary claim because it flies in the face of what we do so far know about reality. And so they do have a better, they require more evidence, not less. And most often these miracle claims are just, you're going to have to believe the testimony of people who were there because you can't go back and check it. So they have almost no evidence, right? They have a story and no evidence, and we're supposed to accept this. And
any amount, go ahead.
Go ahead, no, please.
Well,
I was going to say, is any amount of anecdotal evidence considered evidence? Because in a court of law, a certain number of witnesses, you start to develop some validity.
Right, but if there was a bunch, let's say you had 3 or 4 witnesses and they were all swearing that they were abducted by aliens, like how far do you think that's going to go in a court of law?
Yeah.
Well, in court of law, not so much, but...
Right, but my point is, when people are testifying in a court, when they start saying that things and then she talked to her cat that helped her fly around the room, right? That's something people used to believe in a courtroom, right? But they don't believe that in a courtroom today. When you start to say things that fly in the face of what we know about reality, you no longer sound credible. Right? You lose your credibility when you start saying things that do not align with what people understand about the reality around them.
But do we know, is it fair to say that we know about reality conclusively? That it's
No, I'm not saying
possible?
conclusively. I'm saying what you do know about reality. When someone tells you something that flies in the face of that, they need to make a better case, not just say it. If somebody told me the sun does not come up every day, right?
Right.
They need to make a really good case because I observe it,
Yeah,
and there's lots of evidence to support it.
It doesn't have to be about God. It doesn't have to be about the sun flying around in the sky. You should have a harder time trusting somebody who says something that is unlikely to be true from personal experience. A guy who says, those cartoons where Charlie Brown has a rain cloud over his head and it follows him around and rains on just him? Well, that happened to me the other day. Right. That would be a weird thing to say.
Yeah, and I don't care how sane you've been and how reliable you've been throughout my experience with you. If you start telling me things like that, I'm going to worry about you. I'm not going to think isn't that weird that clouds can do that and I never even knew it.
Now, if you had actually filmed this on your phone,
you're getting a little better now.
That would be, a good start towards saying, okay, there is something weird that happened.
And if a lot of other people filmed it, and if you were able to conjure this cloud in a laboratory, that'd be fantastic. I mean, it could definitely convince people of it if this is happening.
So, Tracie, I think it's fair to say, and I agree with you, that we know about reality that there isn't a God that miraculously heals people. Is it, however, fair to say, to write off the whole thing, that we know about reality? That
I wouldn't even agree with your first statement, though.
Well, that they don't go from blind to seeing. Can I actually say, even if there isn't a God, maybe their explanation of the event is wrong, but maybe they actually did go from blind to seeing?
Yeah, but you need reasons to believe stuff. It's not good enough to just say, maybe it happened, I don't know.
And I also think, I just want to make it clear that I did not say that I know that there is not a God that does not perform miracles on people. I've never said that, right?
I'm saying that.
Okay, when I talk about the things I know, I'm saying that I have, what I know about how people go from being blind to sighted, what I know about it does not involve a God and miracles. Now, if somebody wants to demonstrate that they can, like your friend says he does this a lot, right? Well, great. Then he should be able to do this in front of a physician, right? He should be able to do this in an environment where this can actually be tested.
Right.
So Dustin, this call has gone on for a while, so I think we probably ought to move along.
No worries, guys. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks for your call.
Thank you for calling.
Have a good one.
I hope that cleared up some stuff. I do just want to say a few more words on the moon thing that we talked about a few weeks ago, because a lot of people have been asking about that. And I specifically asked on the show if people would get thermometers when there was a full moon out and try the experiment. To my knowledge, nobody did that, including me. But apparently this is a popular claim that I wasn't familiar with, so I learned something because people pointed out, in fact, even immediately after the show, our friend Mark, who's a physicist, came up to me and mentioned a reason why this might happen. And a lot of other people went and looked it up and confirmed it, which was basically the guy was claiming that if moonlight shines on a thermometer and there's another thermometer right next to it, which is in the shade, the one with the moonlight will be cooler, which is somehow proving that the moonlight is actually cooling off the thermometer, which doesn't make sense because light and heat radiate from the same source.
Did you say anything about it being covered? Because Mark was talking about it being covered.
Well, okay, so the description that I've gotten from a number of people is that basically when moonlight is not hitting a thing, that means that there is something obstructing the moon's light.
There you
And what that also means is that there is something providing shade. It may be close, it may be far away, but it's definitely closer than the moon.
Right.
And the thing about objects is space is really, really cold. So if you've got just space radiating onto something, you've also got a little bit of moonlight, but the moonlight is so faint and so far away that the measurable heat from the moon is, and there is some because the sunlight is bouncing off the moon and radiating onto the thermometer. But by the time that hits the Earth, it's so small that it's practically round-off error. But if you have a close thing that is providing shade from space, then that thing itself has absorbed some heat during the day and tends to make things nearby warmer.
But wouldn't it also impact like heat that comes up from the ground? So that it's like
yes,
blocking
the ground
it?
also radiates heat, but
Right.
that's true for both thermometers.
Right, but it would block it when it hits the cover. Wouldn't that?
Let's see, not necessarily.
Isn't that how a greenhouse works?
Because, let me see, because, the sun is at different places during different parts of the day. So, I guess it depends on how close the two thermometers are.
Right, but
to
when you
some
cover,
extent.
that's why you cover plants and things and they get warmer in the cover because it radiates up, right? Goes in and it can't get back out.
I'm not, right. I'm not really this kind of scientist, so
Okay.
I can't go into this level of detail, and that's why I'm always careful
Well, that's
to
my
say,
understanding of greenhouses anyways, that the
Yes.
heat energy goes in and then when it starts to go out, it's like blocked a little bit. It's
Right.
harder for it to escape because it's got a cover on it. So
Right.
that was my understanding of a
No,
greenhouse.
it sounds very reasonable to me. I think you're right.
Sounds good. Okay. I don't know.
But I think the point I made during the call, I was first skeptical that this experiment would even work, which maybe I shouldn't have been so skeptical. But I think the broader point there was that, first of all, there are a lot of ways to screw that kind of experiment up, and that's why it's not good enough to just have science done by people on YouTube going out and devising their own experiments, because there are things that could be influencing the outcome that you're not aware of. So, for instance, maybe if both thermometers were in separate boxes nearby, but one of them had a pinhole that was allowing the moon to shine in, maybe that would get rid of the effect of just that one object radiating heat. But you can't just jump from this very specific conclusion that seems weird straight to there is an omnipotent guy who is influencing this somehow. Or I think maybe this guy's point was the Earth is flat, because there are actually flat earthers who use this experimental example. But, that's not enough. You have to have a carefully controlled scientific experiment, and you have to make more efforts to figure out other things that could be...
You know what blows my mind about
What?
all of this?
Yeah, what?
They can't convince each other, but they call to convince us.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like you can't even convince other people that believe in a God that this is valid. There's other people that believe in God who will look at this and say this is nuts. But you're going to call an atheist and use this as an explanation. It's something you can't even sell to other theists. Please.
Right. So anyway, I didn't want to leave that loose end. So
That's funny.
I'm going to remind people one more time that if you're just tuning in and you're in Austin and want to come to the usual after-show dinner at 6:30, that is tonight going to be at Star of India instead of the usual place on Anderson Lane. And there's the address on the bottom of your screen. Okay, so next caller, we have Mark in Florida.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
We can hear you fine.
Yep.
Thanks, Mark.
Oh, okay. So I recently found out about your show. I've been watching a few interesting clips on YouTube of you guys debating some really out there crazy people. And it's pretty fun and interesting to watch. And for the past 2 years or so, I've been going through this kind of transitional phase. Right now I'm considering myself a deist.
Okay.
I used to be, hardcore Christian, like crazy. And luckily, I've grown up in a rather progressive family, so it's not, a big deal like getting exiled or outcast. But I've been doing some more research, and I'm just wondering what you guys' thoughts are on the rationality of deism versus all the revealed religions, and also versus atheism itself.
Well, in keeping with our earlier discussion about prejudice and not jumping to conclusions, can you tell me what you mean by deism? Like, can you give me some specifics about what you believe?
Well, I know I've heard the watchmaker analogy, and I'm not so sure about that. I personally, deism makes the most sense in the way I use
what,
it.
Specifically?
But yeah, I was about to get to that. I was saying that this thing that I personally call God is just whatever caused this universe, if this universe has a cause, because I think there's just too much that we don't know, and I'm not about to ascribe any anthropomorphic traits to it or that it has feelings. I mean, you know, I just don't want to count out, not necessarily a quote-unquote supernatural force, but just not necessarily, I guess it's getting a little not necessarily a naturalistic force. That kind of sounds contradictory, though.
So you're ascribing the label to God, the label God to something, but it's not necessarily sentient or conscious in any way. It's just a label that you put on.
And it's whatever made the universe, but not if it's a natural explanation.
Yeah, exactly. That's where it's getting a little weird. I basically just take everything and put it in the God label, just in the sense that whatever this thing is what caused or created our universe. I don't know if it's naturalistic or if it's supernaturalistic.
Then why call it God?
Yeah, how does that help?
Why not just call it whatever created the universe?
Yeah.
And it may or may not be a God.
And that's why... Yeah, and that's why I've been kind of thinking about it and wondering. I certainly like the idea of some benevolent creator watching out for me, but the realism of that is probably very unlikely, considering all the terrible
you
things
said
in the
you'd
world.
already tossed out the idea of the anthropomorphic. So
yeah,
you're
no.
already.
I don't believe in it. I wish I could believe in it. I wish that was real, but it's not. It's
I mean, I think
it's
anyway. Pretty clear when you look at the world that there's not somebody nice looking after us all to make sure bad things don't happen.
Yeah. And that's why I said, and I've been telling people, I've been having trouble because some people have asked lately, what are you? And I don't really like saying anything yet because I'm sort of like trying to figure everything out. It's like crazy.
I think it's fair to tell people you don't know. If they say, what are you? Say, I don't know. I'm still figuring that out.
I agree with that. And I'm going to school right now for physics and science, and I like the idea that you can just say, I don't know, and you don't have to ascribe something supernatural to it.
That's like a big thing that a lot of theists have trouble wrapping their heads around.
Just like miracles.
Yeah, because a lot of times you get raised to assume that not only does everything have an explanation, but the explanation is usually this one thing called God, which is sort of a catch-all thing, and that any amount of uncertainty can just be, that's the Lord's will. But the weird thing about science that doesn't quite jibe with the theistic way of thinking about things is you can withhold belief until you have a good reason to decide for or against something. You don't have to know everything.
There's a really good video. There's this guy, the non-stamp collector, and he has this awesome video where they're like, a couple people are sitting there and they're like, wow, something had to cause everything, and and they're like, well, what caused that? And he's like, well, that would be it'd be like a causeless cause. And anyway, they start adding things to it. Well, what about, this? And so it ends up being like the thing that created all the other things, that nothing created this thing. And they make this big, long word, and people keep coming up with things, and they keep adding to it. And finally, at the end, they're like, wouldn't it be great if we just had a tiny word that we could apply to this thing? Like God, right? So, I mean, I think...
wouldn't it be great if I didn't have to deal with nuance?
I think sometimes
I could just say one thing explains everything.
I really think it's just about coming to grips with I don't know, and there's a lot of things that I don't know, and I don't think it means anything mystical that I don't know something. If I can't explain it or I don't know it, it's like, I just don't know. Maybe there's an explanation, maybe there's not. But like the previous caller, when someone says this miracle, what they're basically saying is, I've given up that anyone's going to explain this. And it's like, really? How do you know that? Like, how do you know that there'll never be an explanation for this? How do you know that there wasn't an explanation?
I would consider myself an optimist in saying that I think and hope at some point that we might be able to explain everything. I mean, I have no idea. We're going to have a lot of time in the future if things go well, which I was actually talking to a friend of mine a while ago, and he said something that kind of scared me. Me being a scientific kind of person and loving all these technological advances, he mentioned something like, what if there was another Dark Ages? What if religion came back to power? Do you think do you think
Dark
that's
Ages,
at all
but
even
the thing
a remote
is,
possibility?
the reason the Dark Ages were so bad was not because of our level of knowledge. It was sociological. It was that and there are historians who dispute that the things we think we know about the Dark Ages are true. But I'm not a historian, so here's another thing I don't know. Ignorant and superstitious societies are often terrible, not just because they don't have very much technology, but also because they have social restraints on what you can learn and investigate. And I think that it's not so important that we know everything, but that we feel free to question everything and try to figure stuff out instead of jumping to conclusions. My dad is a physicist, and I once asked him, do you think we'll ever know everything that we'll need to, that we can possibly know in the universe? And he said, well, if we did, that would be very sad because I'd have nothing left to do.
Yeah, that's true.
And as a scientist, you don't have to look at it as we need to know everything. Part of the fun is having a challenge and being able to explore it and learn things. And so maybe as a college student in a sciencey degree, you're familiar with the concept of asymptotes. So maybe, we could approach a perfect level of knowledge, but never quite reach it because the more we know, the harder it is to get at that last little bit.
And I know that people say the more they know, the more they realize that they don't know.
Right.
Yeah. I just have one more question for you guys. I know a lot of atheists were, they grew up religious, they were in Christian families and everything, or any other religious families. And sometimes I lie awake in bed and I think, I get really scared. I know I shouldn't put any thought into it, but I really start to think about all these supernatural threats of going to hell and how terrible it is that people would actually say that to someone, that you deserve to be burnt for eternity. Because let's face it, I don't believe that a supernatural being is telling them that. They're reading it from a book that people wrote a long time ago, and now they're saying it. And, have you guys ever, when you were first becoming more, becoming an atheist or more rational, did you guys ever have those kind of fears? And did you ever get past them and finally were just like, yeah, this is ridiculous,
I don't think Russell was raised in religion. So
you go ahead.
For me,
no, I just know some people on the show were like Matt.
Yeah, I was, and I mostly feared hell before my conversion. So I had the fear of hell put into me as a mechanism to leverage me to decide to believe in God. It was just one more piece of indoctrination. If I can get you to fear that this thing could happen to you, then you have something to worry about. And I worried badly from the time that I was old enough to understand what it was they were telling me that I was potentially up against, and that the solution was to believe in God. And you torture yourself because you can't force yourself to believe things, right? It's not just about make this statement that you believe in God. You really have to believe it. And God knows if you don't really believe it, right? So you're sitting there and you're like, I don't believe it. And if I'm wrong, I'm going to suffer for eternity. And this is horrible. Yeah, it's a horrendous thing to do to a person. And I felt that fear up until the time I was baptized. And then at that point, I had come against some very, very unconvincing things to me today that convinced me at the time, because I was looking for anything to convince me. I was looking for anything to hang my hat on, to buy into this belief, because it was the only way to escape it. Like in my mind, I thought, I'm either going to believe in a God or I'm going to fear this hell forever. Like that's what I thought, right? There's no way to not fear it, because I'll never know whether or not I'm going to go to hell. And then as I became as I started to deconvert, I first deconverted out of Christianity because I started studying how the Bible was put together, and that was like, oh, there goes Christianity, right? So once I realized that the Bible was just stories, I was able to withdraw myself from Christianity. I still had this amorphous kind of thought about God, like kind of what you're describing, but I was able to get away from Christianity. And so all the Christian tales just disintegrated, right? So I no longer had any reason to think that hell was real. I had no reason to think that Jesus was a God. I had no like all these things that Christianity was asserting were no longer valid, because my whole basis for believing those things was the Bible, which I now understood was what it was. And so I then learned that there is a space you can inhabit where you do not believe a God exists and you do not fear hell.
I just want to throw in being, as Tracie mentioned, in the never religious category. Just a quick story. When I was a teenager, I went through a Stephen King phase for a while. I liked reading a lot of horror novels, and I noticed...
I'm in that phase.
Oh, yeah. I'm not saying it's a phase you have to grow out of.
No, I know. I'm just saying.
But he's a good author. One thing I noticed, and this is probably a difference between your experience and mine, Stephen King has a lot of different patterns that he falls into, and one thing I noticed was that he was really scaring me effectively in books like Misery, where there was a lot of psychological terror and people being cruel to each other. And I was also scared by his stuff where creepy, unexplainable things were happening to people that caused them to behave weirdly. But then in a lot of books he would go into, and it turns out it was demons, or it was magic things or aliens or something. And at that point in the book I was always like, all right, you're losing me, Stephen, because I'm not scared of this stuff. And I think I can attribute that to the fact that religious imagery doesn't really creep me out the way it does a lot of other people, because it was never part of my underlying mental processes.
That makes sense.
I mean, The Exorcist, I've heard, is a super scary movie, but I don't think so. And
see, I used to not be able to watch that movie by myself, like even out, like not that long ago. And recently I watched it by myself, and I was just like, why was I ever afraid of this movie? I mean, it no longer scares me, and I watch horror like all the time, and I think part of it is just me looking for something scary because there's nothing anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and
so
that's funny because I was just going to say real quick, I've been watching Game of Thrones with my family, and, there are all these scary monsters in it, but what's really scary are the people when they're cruel to each other, and, all the torture.
Ramsay Snow is like way scarier than any White Walkers.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not saying that you're wrong to be scared of hell. I'm just saying it doesn't necessarily stick around beyond the point where you personally take it seriously. And if you think that you should be careful of hell because a lot of people believe it and, it might be true, you should think about all the other things people believe that you don't even waste time on.
But here's a question for you that might help too, and this is something that also went through my head at the time. If you learned that there were a God that created you and then created this horrible torture for you to inhabit for eternity if you refused to love that God and worship that God, could you really love that God? Like, even if you knew that eternal torture awaited you, if you didn't, could you love a being that would do that to you?
I say I've already gotten past that phase when I actually watched, there was a clip with Matt a while ago saying that essentially any God like that, you're morally superior to, because it's just childish to say that, especially with the whole Christian thing, an all-loving God, yet he's going to send people to this terrible place.
Right. So and I mean, if you're going through life and you're doing the best you can, you're trying to be good and you're searching, right? Like you're looking for answers and you're talking to us, right? You're really you're seeking here. And you're trying to talk to different people and get their opinions and get their ideas, and you're trying to figure out what to believe here. And then let's say you die in the middle of this search, and God says, "Well, you didn't believe in me, you didn't love me, you didn't figure out what I was before you died, and so you're going to hell." I mean,
Yeah.
what could you have done to avoid it?
No, yeah.
Nothing. There's
I don't
nothing
think there's
you
anything,
could
yeah.
do. So at a certain point, you just have to say, you know what? If I'm in for an eternity of hell, then there's really nothing I can do about it. I mean, it's
At least
unavoidable.
I got this one, right?
Yeah, you got
At least
this
I got
one
this life.
Yeah, you
I can think about all the memories I had while I burn.
They'll take them away from you. Hell is evil. So,
yes.
but
Oh,
but
boy.
I mean, seriously, when you realize that you're doing the best you can, and that God would still send you to hell, it's like, what else are you supposed to do? So you might as well not worry about it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Good advice.
Yep. Well, thank you guys so much.
sure,
Thank
Nice
you.
talking with you.
sure.
Appreciate the call, and if you have any further thoughts or changes of heart, let us know.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
See ya.
Okay.
We are going to Angela in Virginia. Angela?
Hello, Angela.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Tracie. Hi, Russell. I love you.
Okay.
And
Okay, I love
wait
you
a minute.
Do you?
Wait a minute. What? It is true. I love you and I respect you. Just I'm not atheist, okay?
Okay.
I do love you. But because I'm not atheist, that doesn't mean I don't listen to you, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Now we clear that out. Okay. Please don't get mad at me, okay? I'm from Greece, okay? I
Yes.
brought up as a Greek Orthodox. That's very, very powerful thing, okay?
Okay.
All right. Okay. I just would like to know, you are 1,000% sure there is no God, no such thing. And also, what about all these people who wrote the Revelation, the Apocalypse, who wrote the Mass, who did the church, who built the churches, who did all this, let's say, history, religious history? What are they? Why they did that? And, I mean, what did you believe?
That's a lot of questions.
Yeah. Well, first of all,
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
do you want
sorry.
to? You go ahead and hit it.
Well, I mean, I'm going to back up to the first thing you said is, are you 100% sure that God exists? And
1,000.
I think that
said
is
1,000.
not a meaningful question to me, because I don't put stock in people saying they're 100% positive
Fair enough.
of anything. I am very, very convinced that no God exists. I could have my mind changed eventually by evidence, but at the moment, if you listen to the first caller we had, we talked a lot about miracles and the threshold that something needs to completely overtake or overturn a model of the world that you have. So I think it's really, really, really unlikely that a God exists, personally.
Yeah. And I don't think that the fact that people built things demonstrates there's a God.
Yeah, it demonstrates that they believed there was a God.
And that people are
Probably.
good at building really amazing things.
Yes. Yeah, I'm
And they
very
should give
impressed by
themselves
people.
some credit.
Okay. If I don't believe in God, I just feel empty and lost. What did I should believe?
How do you know how you would feel if you don't believe in God? Have you ever not believed in God?
No, not even for a moment.
Then
no.
how do you know you would feel empty?
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Okay.
Well, I mean,
What about-
I guess you can think that a lot of your identity is wrapped up in the religious beliefs you were raised in, and a lot of your framework for looking at the world is filtered through this God belief you have. And so it might feel to you as if giving up that belief in God would take away a core part of your identity and your worldview. But I can also mention from not so much personal experience since I didn't switch.
Observation.
But yeah, I've talked to a lot of people who have given up the belief in God. And, you replace that stuff with something else. And
Curiosity about the world around you.
Right. Even something that can be more satisfying and, intellectually enjoyable.
And tangible.
Yeah. Than believing in God.
Chris Johnson, this might be a good time to plug Chris.
Ooh, Chris Johnson.
Chris Johnson is a gentleman who's done a series called, what is it?
A Better Life.
A Better Life, where he talks about joy and meaning in the lives of atheists and interviews atheists and talks to them about what they believe and what they feel and what gives them joy and meaning in their lives. And I think
we're not on public access, so I can say you should look that up and buy the DVD.
Or he's looking for Patreon supporters.
Yeah.
So, but the thing is, you'd have to talk to, for every atheist, there is a different explanation for what gives their life joy and meaning, because what gives you joy and what gives you meaning is going to be different than what gives someone else joy and meaning.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. I understand what you're saying. Where I come from, I got to tell you something. For 500 years now, Greeks and Turks fighting for this religion, okay?
Okay.
And it's a reality. Honest to goodness, it's a reality. But also I have another question, please, if I may. When you just walk on the street or something happened to you, don't you say, "Oh my God," or something, out of I don't know.
Yes, and sometimes I say far more vulgar things. But
yes.
There's a lot of things that might come out of my mouth when something happens to me.
I sometimes say words that mean intercourse, but I don't literally mean them at that moment.
Okay, you make me laugh. Okay. Okay. So are you saying, what are you saying about, say St. Luke, St. Paul, whatever, the St. Matthew who wrote the Bible, Moses, whatever, all this is bunch of nothing. Where does this come from?
Well, they didn't write the Bible, though. I mean, if you get a Bible that has translator's notes, you'll see that they explain that the authors are not known. So the church later attributed the authorship to these particular people, but they don't really know who wrote the books.
Yeah, there's a lot of history behind the Bible, and a lot of it, like there's even apocryphal stuff that was also a candidate for going in the Bible.
Her Bible would be the Eastern Orthodox Bible,
right,
which would be different than the Catholic Bible, which would be different than the Protestant Bible.
Right, and a bunch of people got together something like 400 years later, and periodically after that, and would review the stuff that's available and be like, this one doesn't quite fit what we think the message of the Bible is. And so the authors aren't known as clearly as you seem to be thinking. Like even the first book wasn't written until 30 years after Jesus allegedly died.
Right, and that's for the New Testament. The Old Testament's even more, like a hodgepodge of other cultural, religious traditions and things like that.
Yeah, the Old Testament is a huge bunch of oral tradition that eventually got written down by somebody, and weird translations of folk stories. So it's complicated and fascinating to find out the actual history that we do know of who wrote the Bible.
Okay, I understand. I understand, and I mean, I respect what you believe. Okay, it's not like because you're atheist and I believe in that, I don't like you and I say, oh my God, oops, sorry. No, I don't hate you. I just respect you, and I just love you. But tell me now, really you say, upon evidence, Jesus didn't walk in the earth? Who was Jesus?
I try to be really careful about saying that because I think the mainstream view of history is that Jesus existed, but it's also really tenuous.
Well, and also the Jesus that they say existed is not the same Jesus that's portrayed in the Christian Bible.
Exactly. So, like, you know, the fact that Jesus existed doesn't necessarily mean that he, for instance, walked on water.
Right.
It just means there was a guy,
I think
and the stories were loosely based on him.
Most of the historians that are just taken seriously in espousing that Jesus walked the earth would say that he was like a reformist rabbi. And I think that's about as much as you're going to get from them.
Right. And then there are people like Richard Carrier and David Fitzgerald, whose work is very interesting, and they think that Jesus didn't exist.
Yeah.
But even they would say, we're going against the grain here by putting that out there.
Yeah, the mainstream view is just that he probably was a person that was a Jew and potentially a rabbi that was reforming the religion in some way.
Right, and to answer your question, but I mean, the short answer to your question, who was Jesus, was he was just some guy from history, and we know, like, we have a handful of facts that are attributed to him, and we're not sure.
And you could ask the same thing of, like, who was Buddha, right? I mean, there's like all these traditions about who was the person that Buddha was based upon, and there's like a few different ideas about that as well. And there's all kinds of strange traditions about Buddha and weird things, miraculous things that he has done. But that's probably, that's not really taken seriously by historians. They tend to think that if there was this person behind this legend, that they were probably far more mundane than the stories.
But also, say Jesus or whoever he was, been crucified, he been hanged on the cross.
Yeah,
that's part of the story, yeah.
Tracie and I learned one time that Muslims specifically deny that Jesus was crucified. They say he was a real person and a prophet of Allah, but he was never crucified at all. Which isn't to say that I believe Muslims. It just means people have very passionate, specific beliefs about things they have no idea about.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know. I don't know if there was a Jesus and if he was crucified or not.
Okay. And I just have questions. Maybe it doesn't mean anything, but so Christmas, Easter, Hanukkah, something, whatever. What did you do Christmas? You just
Russell was raised Jewish.
You have a few months to go before my annual Screw Christmas rant. But many atheists I know very much love Christmas, and that's fine.
Yeah. Russell was raised Jewish.
Yeah, secular Jewish. Yeah. And so a lot of atheists find that weird, and I shouldn't say that. But
no, I don't think it's weird. There's also secular Catholics that I've met that don't really have any beliefs, but their whole family is Catholic, and so they just do the thing because that's part of their family and cultural tradition. But yeah, for me, I celebrate Christmas just like Dickens. I have the Charles Dickens style Christmas, with all the
figgy pudding.
Yeah, there you go. Cook a goose.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, I feel I do pray. Okay, I have to say this. Okay, we are friends. We talk. You're on the opposite side. Okay, we're both on the opposite side. But so what? I do pray, and when I pray, I feel like I'm connected to God. Okay? And if I don't pray, if I lose the connection, it scares the creep out of me. If I lose the connection with God, with Jesus, with Holy Mary, I mean, So and now I'm saying that and I'm having goosebumps. I don't know why, but I do.
Psychology?
Well, we had a caller, the last caller talked about the fear of hell, and I talked about how when I was, before I became a Christian, I was very afraid of hell because they had taught me to be afraid of hell. And so I was scared of it. They told me that, hey, you're risking hell, and I believed that. And so I had all these fears at the time. I don't have them anymore, but I did, back when I was afraid that all of that was real. And then later, when I believed it was real, I went ahead and got baptized, and I felt like I was safe, from it. And now I just don't believe it anymore, so it doesn't scare me. And I mean, I understand. There's a psychologist named Carl Jung, who was the earliest person that I'm aware of that wrote about the idea that the idea of God is really just the part of our brain or the part of our mind that is like the intuitive aspect that we don't really have conscious awareness of. So that we do have a dialogue that goes on within our own heads where we are in connection with, kind of in a weird way, someone else. It's actually ourselves, but it's a part of ourselves that we don't have conscious awareness of. It's the same part of our brain that kicks out bizarre dreams at night and, puts out, makes us think about things that we didn't think of, where thoughts arise and we're like, where did that come from? There's a lot going on in your brain that you're not consciously controlling or even consciously aware of. And that part of your brain communicates with you, even though you're not always aware of that conversation until those thoughts and impulses become conscious to you. But that can seem, a lot of people think that can seem like somebody kind of influencing you in a way that they're sort of giving you thoughts or giving you ideas or giving you feelings because you don't know where they're actually coming from. So I don't know if this is what you're experiencing when you talk about the connectedness, but it's certainly possible.
Okay, well, you're talking about dreams. Yeah, I have experience. I'm not going to get into it. It's a long story, but someone in my family, older person, got sick, very sick, and I dreamed 3 months before he got sick, and I dreamed about that. What the heck was that? I can still never explain it. I don't understand it, but I guess my brain said something to me.
I have lots of dreams every night. I mean, people.
By the way, this should be the last topic.
People
we
have
cover
lots of dreams
moving on.
at night. Like you don't just have one dream. So people have REM that goes in cycles while they're sleeping, and you have many, many dreams every single night, whether you remember them or not. And
I understand.
When you think about how many things you dream and how many dreams you have and how bizarre some of those connections are, it would be very strange if nothing you dreamed, if something you dreamed didn't ever happen in your waking life, right? If you went your entire life, like 70 years of dozens of dreams a night, and nothing that you dreamed ever was dreamed prior to it occurring, that would be really strange. More strange than things happening.
And dreams that you have that feel prophetic tend to stick out in your mind. If you had dreamed that somebody was going to die and then they lived another 10 years, odds are you'd forget that dream after a while. And so thanks to the magic of confirmation bias, it seems like you're having prophetic dreams at a greater frequency than you actually are, because all the ridiculous things you imagine are going to happen and don't happen aren't incidents that stay with you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, look, for me, it was enjoyable.
Good.
Me too.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
And thank you for taking my call. I really appreciate it. And please be safe and stay healthy. And
Thank you. You too.
do whatever you do.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank you.
so much.
All right.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye. I love you.
Thank you.
She really loves us.
That's a great sign off. I think I'm going to start telling people that. Do whatever you do.
I'm just going to end every phone call with bye, I love you.
There you go. I think Angela was quite delightful.
Yes. Let's see, we're running out of time. We used to, okay, first of all, screeners, stop taking new calls, seriously.
Please.
We cut off at 6. We used to do an after show, but now we just go another half hour. So I think maybe I'll try to do a lightning round where I get through ending callers real quick.
Speed calling.
But John is another deist, so I may give him a little more of more time in the lightning round. John, can you do this in about 5 minutes?
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Am I on the? Okay. Oh, hi. I don't know that I'm a deist. I don't know that I'm an atheist.
Okay.
It's hard for me to define myself as one of these words because the definitions are so loose. But I would like to argue that the atheist stands at that gods do not, or a deist does not exist, is not exactly, I don't believe, in my opinion, correct.
Okay.
Wait, I'm
why?
not sure I understood the question. What was it?
He just said that he doesn't believe the atheist position that gods don't exist is correct.
But is that the atheist position?
That most likely deists do not exist.
Wait, I'm not
the
saying.
deists
I'm
don't
not saying.
exist?
I
Of
don't
course
think.
deists exist. Thomas Jefferson was a deist.
I mean deities. I'm sorry, deities.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Deities.
Yeah. Well, gods,
But that's
deists,
not
or deities. That's the
So
same
you're taking
thing.
on a particular aspect of atheism. Then your argument is with one group of atheists.
Well, in general terms, I would, in my opinion, God's. How do you define? You can't define something that doesn't exist, right?
Well, why should we believe something that we can't define then?
Yeah.
You shouldn't. You shouldn't believe anything you can't define.
But
Okay.
he's not.
Can
He's
you
not
define a
using.
deity?
You can define a God, right?
Okay.
Can you define?
Well,
how do you
then define
how-
it for me, and I'll tell you whether I believe in that thing.
Well, I would ask you what your definition of God would be.
I don't have one. There are a lot
Yeah,
of people
atheists
who
are
believe a lot of
responding.
different things.
Atheists are responding to theistic claims.
Okay, I understand that. So theistic claims is there's a guy in the sky. He's most likely white, Caucasian, with long blonde. Well,
I don't
gray
believe
hair.
I don't
there's-
believe that thing. So that's
yeah.
one definition
That's
of God
yeah.
that I
There's a
definitely
lot
don't
of
believe.
lot of definitions.
Okay.
Give me
Well,
another
I guess
one.
what I'm trying to say is, well, how about Julius Caesar? He was a deity.
He existed, didn't have magical powers, probably. Next.
I don't think he ever claimed to have magical powers.
Well, then.
He
why
existed
did
and was a man.
Why did people call him a deity?
Because he had won wars, and so therefore he must be divine.
Well, if that's what a deity is, then General Patton is one. So.
Yeah, I agree. They're man-made. All gods are man-made, so therefore they exist as man-made constructs. Now,
Okay.
in my opinion, they exist as mythological characters and whatnot. And I think the point is to bring it out that the stories that are being put forward that define these individuals or deities, the stories are not true. I mean, some have some truth in them, and some don't, and it's kind of a fuzzy kind of deal. But it seems like many religions were designed as governments in the beginning, and it's what ruled the masses. And
let me just interject. If the argument here is that deities exist as concepts, then
Yes.
we're strawmanning atheism, because atheism has not got a problem with the idea that there are concepts of deities. I myself studied anthropology of religion, so I'm very familiar with the idea that different cultures have all kinds of beliefs in gods and spirits. But that to me is not what the atheist is responding to when they say a God does not exist. Or even when they say, I don't believe that a God exists, depending on which group of atheists we're talking about.
Well, I didn't realize there were groups of atheists.
Well,
I'm sorry.
you started out,
Prejudice.
you started out with the idea that atheists do not, that atheists say there is no God or something like that, or God does not exist. And there's
They say
there's an
yeah.
entire group of atheists who simply say, I do not believe that a God exists, and they do not assert that there are no gods.
God, yes, and I understand that. And
Okay.
that's the burden of proof. Then becomes they're just saying they don't believe it, so they don't have to come up with a burden of proof to
Right,
have any
because
evidence.
why should you don't have to prove why, you can explain why you don't believe it, like why you think the evidence is shoddy.
Right. So it seems
But-
to me like you said you think the atheist position is wrong, but so far you haven't said anything that we really disagree with. Did I miss one?
Well, right, exactly. You seem to agree with me that the deities some deities do exist, and
No,
that they
exist
are,
as concepts, yes.
Well, or
concept, yes.
if deity
Or
doesn't mean
individual.
anything except somebody who has won wars, then cool, deities exist.
Well, but that's not what he said. He said somebody won wars, which means they must be divine, and that I do disagree with.
Well, it depends on what he means by divine.
Well, it means
Well, that's what. We can't prove that they weren't divine, that they won those
right.
wars because
But
they were
there's
divine.
no reason to believe it.
It's just their claim, and we don't have to believe it or not. All we can know is that in history we
You
can
do
tell
have
that
to
they did
believe it or not. You absolutely have to believe it or not. There's no other options.
Right. Now, you don't have to believe it's false, but you do have to.
You either
do
believe it or you don't
something,
believe it.
You don't believe it.
It's like, do you believe he was a deity? And if you don't accept that he was a deity, then you don't believe he was a deity.
Well, I do believe all gods are man-made, and that he was a man-made deity.
You sound like an atheist to me, but I think we're just haggling over labels.
Yeah, I don't know of any atheist so far that thinks the way you're reacting as though an atheist would think.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out a better way to relate to people who are Christian and other serious religions that are trying to understand the reality of their God. And I would like to point out that their God is most likely a construct of man, as all gods are constructs of man, and therefore, and then look for truth in what it is they're believing, because a lot of it's not true.
Right. I think that's your 5 minutes. But one thing I would suggest is that you go to the ironchariots.org wiki, which is a wiki made for atheists by atheists, and look up atheist on it and see what they say, what we say about ourselves, and maybe you'll find you agree with that more than not.
And I would also just plug Joseph Campbell, because he's the one that said all religions are true, none of them are literal. So he believes that they're all metaphor, and that from a metaphorical standpoint, they do say something about the human condition, but that in a real, like literal context, they're hogwash.
Okay, thanks for calling.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Sure. All right. Lightning round. Craig in Roseville, who's been waiting a very long time. I'm sorry we give priority to theist callers. You have like 2 minutes. What's up?
Go, Craig.
That's fine. I'll try to be as concise as possible.
Thank you.
So skip the entire background, but I was raised Lutheran by both sides of my family and came to atheism in my early 20s. The deconversion process has been about 10 years now. So my question, though, is I have a 2.5-year-old son and a 10-month-old daughter, and my family is very upset on both sides that I have decided not to baptize my children, because they are my children and I don't believe in these fairy tales. So, but recently it's been becoming more of an issue, and there's been a lot more pressure for from them saying, well, we feel like it's the wrong thing to do. We don't understand why you're not doing it. And the empathetic part of me says, well, screw it. I really don't care if somebody sprinkles some water on my kids and says some magic words. But then the principled part of me says, no, these are my children, and I'm not going to engage them or subject them to ritualistic religious practices based on my principles, and they're my children. So what do you have for that?
I would say the short answer is that as a parent, you have every right to set standards for how your kids are educated and to draw boundaries against your religious family. And it can be very challenging to teach kids to grow up skeptical, but there are a lot of ways to do it. And I think I have a list of resources for you. If you go to the Atheist Experience blog and Google on that, a couple of posts called Raising Atheists, Part 1 and Part 2, that I wrote a few years ago. Tracie, got anything to add?
The only thing I would add, which isn't going to be helpful because it's sort of the other side of the coin, is that there's always the concept of choose your battles, right? So, like you're saying, sprinkling water on the kids when they don't even know what's going on, is that a battle that you want to take on with your family, as opposed to we want to take the kids to church and teach them about God, which to me would be a battle worth having.
I would say maybe letting them sprinkle the water would set a precedent.
Right.
Where they would
now,
feel more
that's the
afraid
other
of it.
thing.
Right,
it's like,
which is
do you say, like, well, I caved here and they're going to expect me to cave in the future? Or do you say, I'm okay doing this because it's meaningless drivel and it's something that makes them happy and it won't hurt the kids? And then when you hit a certain point, you say, no, see, this is different because this does affect my kids. This does harm my children, and I don't want them indoctrinated. It depends. I mean, you draw the lines where you draw the lines. Whether or not they would see that as like, you flexing a boundary so that they could then take advantage of boundaries in the future. I mean, I don't know. You draw them where you draw them. But I do think that you have to take into consideration what this means for family relations for you and your kids as well as
Absolutely, and that's where the empathetic part of me kind of comes in.
Yeah, I understand.
Like you said, Tracie, picking your battle. So,
Yep.
I'll let it go for tonight. Maybe.
Thanks, Craig.
Maybe call back.
Call again sometime.
And
we'll
you know what? Here's the thing,
conversation.
Craig. Go to the blog, and I'm going to ask our viewers to go to the blog and give Craig your advice. Like, what do you think?
Have a long discussion.
So,
more questions. There was another specific question I had as well.
Quickly.
Sorry,
Sorry,
we're out of time. Bye.
Okay. All right. Russell's in charge of the phone.
Yep. And I was going to take one more, but he hung up. Oh, well, okay.
I don't know. Wait a second. Who's
Reid?
that? Are you there, Reid?
Yeah.
Yes.
You
Hey.
have like 1 minute and you're going to ask about presuppositionalism? Good luck.
Okay, well, I just, what was the good ideas and for talking with presuppositionalist apologists? One engaged me off of a Google group I'm on, and I pretty much tried to calmly and logically refute and dispute everything he said, but did I do a good job? I don't know. A lot of people think I did.
No, because all they're gonna do is come back with because God.
Yeah.
Why don't you? Matt has done some debates. Have you? You did a
had
long
an online,
one. Yeah.
Like it went across 10 posts, and they were very long and comprehensive. With a guy whose name escapes me right now.
And that's at the blog.
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
shoot.
On the Atheist blog.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is at the Atheist Experience
on your
blog. Russell blogged it. It was
Russell
some
Glasser,
responses.
presuppositional.
Yeah, you can find it
I'm
there.
Gonna find it.
And
the
also,
title.
I know that Matt did some debates, and you can watch those and see the kinds of things he came up against and what he, had to address. And again, I'm going to tell the bloggers, the people at our blog, like, please feel free to give your own input and experience with presuppositionalism, because we're, obviously not able to devote a lot of time to Reid on this call. So I think the more people who give feedback, the better. So Reid, you can check the blog and see if people have input.
The posts are I was arguing with a fellow called Stephen Feinstein, Feinstein. And I have 5 posts up at the Atheist Experience blog.
Yeah. Who's the guy that Matt
look it up.
debated?
Cy Ten
posted
Bruggencate.
mine.
Look that up.
Yeah, that's the other one. That's the guy Matt debated, Cy.
What was it? I'm sorry. What was the name?
Cy Ten Bruggencate. SYE.
Yeah. Just look up Matt Dillahunty and Cy.
Debate. Yes.
You'll get hits.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
I went through a long thing with this guy too, and
yeah, I'm
might
sure.
get,
Well, call back another week,
yeah,
and maybe
so.
we'll give it another shot. And that's our show.
All right.
We will be meeting next at Star of India, just for tonight,
Yay,
possibly
India.
next week. And the address is 2900 West Anderson Lane. And we'll see you guys there.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Tracie.
Thank you.